President Emmanuel Macron has been receiving Russia's Vladimir Putin at the Palace of Versailles in a visit that will likely shape Franco-Russian relations for years to come. We'll be looking at its significance. And here in China, a new trial of a man who was initially sentenced to life imprisonment has had his case retried by a higher court. After huge public discussion online, we'll be looking at the ramifications of this case. Welcome to The Point. I'm Lu Xin. French President Emmanuel Macron has been receiving Russia's Vladimir Putin at the Palace of Versailles outside Paris this Monday to inaugurate an exhibition marking 300 years of Franco-Russian diplomatic ties. During the presidential election campaign, Macron was viewed as taking a tougher line on Russia than his main rivals, although he has said it is vital to continue talking with Moscow. Is Russia ready to start a new dialogue with the new French president? I'm happy to be joined in Paris by Professor Joav Toker from the American Graduate School of Diplomacy, and in London, Mr. Alexander Nekrasov, a former Kremlin advisor. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Mr. Nekrasov, first, the Russian ambassador to France, Alexander Orlov, called the upcoming meeting an essential visit in a media interview. How do you read his interpretation of essential visit here?
Well, I think that we are witnessing a change of Russian diplomacy, because the hopes in Moscow that Donald Trump might become a different sort of president and will be prepared to have a different type of relations with Russia have faded. So Russia now needs to show to the Americans that it can have its own diplomacy regarding the Europeans. And I think this visit, which comes after the G7 summit, I think that it adds a certain significance to it, because Putin is signaling to Trump that we have other matters and we have other countries to talk to. On the other hand, my personal opinion is that we shouldn't expect too much from this these talks, because at the moment France is very negative towards Russia. We should conclude that Macron, although he is a new president, he is in a sense extension of Hollande. All this talk about, centrist and so on, I don't think that plays out. I think he will continue Hollande's policy. He will be tough on Ukraine. He will be tough on Syria. He will be tough on sanctions. So this is just a testing visit. Putin will be testing, the grounds, and Macron was probably going to tell him things he's not going to be happy about. But I noticed the body language of the two leaders was quite positive. So there is some hope that maybe in the future these relations might change. At the moment, I see absolutely no hope of any change.
Absolutely no hope. Professor Toker, what is your take on this? And also, centrist Macron was the only candidate with a very apparent anti-Putin stance, while others say he is not considered a Russia hawk. What do you think of Macron's stance on Russia?
Yeah, that's true. But first of all, let's be cautious regarding what candidates say during the campaign for all purposes. And I rather agree with my distinguished colleague in London, who knows very well the way the Kremlin thinks. One should not expect something spectacular, neither breakthroughs, but don't forget that there is in modern diplomacy a role for freshness, for new faces, for gestures, for images. These do not go to the substance, and these would not arrange issues which are problematic in the bilateral Russian-French relations or in the overall relations of Russia with the West. But elements which are on the surface and which may seem to be superficial, such as a prestigious gesture of President Putin and President Macron walking in beautiful Versailles Palace and evoking the memory of 3 centuries since Peter the Great, of relations between the great Russia and the great France all the way back in the 17th century. These things do matter on the surface. sure, but those elements on the surface do have their relative significance when it comes to tackle issues which are difficult to tackle, such as Ukraine, such as the Syrian civil war, etc., etc. So it's important to have this kind of set of gestures in the hope that whatever comes out of these gestures would indeed help some progress on the profound issues.
Sure. Well, the optics are sometimes necessary and important. However, let's talk about what Mr. Putin might have to face as a new reality. I mean, he obviously supported Le Pen during the campaign, and Le Pen also had a much friendlier tone towards Russia. Mr. Nekrasov, what could be Putin's view of France under Macron, and could France be a key to having the sanctions against Russia lifted by the EU?
Well, first of all, you rightly point out that Moscow is in a bit of a difficult situation because it now needs to backtrack from supporting Le Pen and sort of say that, well, let it be bygones, and we are looking at a fresh new reality. I must say that when Le Pen visited Moscow before the elections, I commented on that visit, and I said that's practically signals the death of her campaign, that was the end. And I think in the Kremlin, they realized also that when Le Pen came to Moscow before the elections, that was the end of her campaign, and they started to backtrack already then. And that when the rhetoric started to calm down, and Macron, you know, the Russian officials were starting to say that, well, the French people need to decide themselves. It's not for Russia to decide who's going to run France. So this campaign of trying to get closer to Macron was started already before the elections. And I think now Putin's first visit will be a sort of a gate opener for the Russian diplomats to start talking to the French diplomats. I don't really see much common ground at the moment at all, but I think that the Russians are sending a signal already when sources in Moscow were telling the Russian press agencies that they are hoping at least for a change in the attitude, I stress, on the business relations between the two countries. So they are sending the signal, okay, politically maybe it's not easy to start sort of being seen as friendly, but let's do the business format. Now Russia has this format with Britain. With Britain, for many, many decades, the political relations were terrible. But business relations were developing very quickly. So I think that is what Putin will try to push through. We can be, he will say to Macron, we already said probably, we can be enemies politically and, you know, criticize each other, but let's do business separately from that.
Professor,
let's put business interests separately, and let's do business in a different way.
Professor,
that, I think, is the policy of the Kremlin at the moment.
More pragmatic approach. Professor Tocker, what could be some of the areas for closer economic cooperation or business deals between the two sides in your eyes?
Well, on that level, first of all, there's a French interest, which is easy to identify, which deals with French agricultural sector. As a matter of fact, sanctions, you know, hurt on both sides. Of course, they hurt mainly Russia, which is the object and the victim of the sanctions, but they do hurt French growers and French agricultural sector. As a matter of fact, that was one of the issues referred to during the election campaign. I would add to this punctual business type consideration perhaps one more element which is part of the larger picture we have dealt with over the last few minutes of the conversation. Don't forget, my colleague in London mentioned the fact that the hopes in Moscow regarding a change of attitude of American diplomacy had faded out, and they probably do not count anymore in Moscow regarding a positive change towards Moscow on the side of President Trump. I would nuance that a little bit, first of all, because we do not know really yet what is really the diplomatic, big strategic paradigm of President Trump. And secondly, let's add what we have learned over the last few days, over the NATO summit in Brussels and the G7 summit in Sicily, Italy, over the last weekend, and what the German Chancellor just said 48 hours ago, saying Europe is aware of, should be aware of the fact that Europe cannot count anymore entirely on American and British support. These are very harsh, meaningful words, even if they were said mainly in order to impress. I mean, that could alter a lot of things in the Moscow-Paris or Moscow-Paris-Washington axis. So let's pay attention to that.
Yeah, Mr. Nekrasov, actually I wanted to ask you that. How do you think Merkel's latest opinion or stance could affect the EU, including France's relationship with Russia? If the United States under Donald Trump cannot be relied on from now on, does that mean there is a potential rapprochement with Russia? Because they just viewed, they just expressed the opinion that Russia, together with terrorism, is a threat to NATO.
Well, I think that the Russians see a window of opportunity in this division between the G7 countries, which, and obviously Britain and the EU. And I think that Russian diplomats are going to use this window of opportunity because although Merkel made her comment, I think, which was addressed to London and Washington in a certain, aggressive way, I think she actually meant that Europe needs to look beyond America and Britain and needs to look at its relations with other countries. I think China, by the way, is going to play a big new role in Europe as well. So this is that window that Moscow is trying to probably sneak in or try to sneak in. It's not yet clear. The problem is, of course, I agree with the distinguished professor. I agree that the whole problem is that nobody really knows what Donald Trump's foreign policy is about. And that's the main problem for any country in Europe, outside Europe, for Russia, for China, for everybody. Everybody is waiting for that foreign policy to materialize. And Trump keeps everybody guessing. And that is why, although we see certain maneuvers on the part of Russia, on the part of Germany, on the part of others, I still think everybody is waiting for Washington to say something specific. That is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to develop, and so on. And so I think it's very difficult, because of that unclearness of Washington's intentions,
even
it's
confusion,
very difficult to forecast how Europe will develop.
Well, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Professor Joachim Toker from the American Graduate School of Diplomacy and Mr. Alexander Nekrasov, former Kremlin advisor. And here is my first point. Now, as we just heard, German Chancellor Angela Merkel famously said that Germany cannot rely on Trump's America anymore. It seems the same ideology is not a guarantee of good ties. Likewise, different ideology doesn't have to be an obstacle either. Let's remember it was the Soviet Union as part of the Allies who helped liberate part of France and large parts of Europe from the onslaught of Nazism. Actually, the close ties between France and Russia date much further back than that. Tsar Peter's visit to France 300 years ago gives us a glimpse of the common roots shared by the two countries. As the Russian ambassador to France, Alexander Orlov, said, and I quote, "Leo Tolstoy and Anton Chekhov are equally close and clear to the French as Alexander Dumas and Victor Hugo are to the Russians." Although Franco-Russian relations have been bumpy over the past few years, in the long run, greater exchanges can be expected between the two sides. Intentional injury or excessive self-defense? This was the question a provincial high court was trying to decide on a highly controversial case in East China's Shandong province. A young man named Yu Huan stabbed 4 people, killing 1, after he and his mother were humiliated and abused by debt collectors from a local loan shark. The first verdict sentenced him to life imprisonment for intentional injury, triggering widespread fury. The case has been taken to the Provincial High Court, what is likely to be the second verdict and how much has public opinion swayed the result? To get more insight, I'm joined by Mr. Bai Xianyue, Managing Partner of Chengyi Law School, and Professor Jiang Su, Associate Professor from the Law School of Peking University. But first, here's a look at the dateline of this case.
On April 14, 2016, more than 10 people went to Su Yinsha's company in a county in Shandong to collect payment for loan sharks, allegedly insulting Su and her son Yu Huan. Police arrived at the scene and then left without taking any effective measures. Yu later stabbed 4 of the debt collectors, one of whom died the next morning. On February 17, 2017, Yu Huan was sentenced to life imprisonment by the Intermediate People's Court of Liaocheng City, sparking heated debate on the internet. Yu appealed after the trial. On March 26th, the Supreme People's Procuratorate pledged to review the case to determine whether Yu was acting in self-defense and to investigate possible dereliction of duty by the police officers involved. On May 27th, a higher court in East China's Shandong province reopened the case. Afterwards, the Supreme People's Procuratorate revealed details of the investigation and suggested Yu Huan's behaviour should be seen as excessive defence, while at the same time determining that the police officers were not derelict in their duty.
Now, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Professor Jiang, to you first. What has made the Chinese people so concerned about this case?
I think there are several reasons why the general public in China has become interested in this case. I think the first reason is that the ordinary citizens think that it's too harsh to impose a life imprisonment on Yu Huan in the judgment of the first instance trial. And the second reason is that this case is concerned with the so-called loan shark phenomenon in Chinese society.
Yeah, Mr. Bai, now what is your personal opinion of the latest opinion that's released by the China's top prosecutor's office after the second trial has been held, but before the announcement of the second verdict? What do you think is the message that the top prosecutor's office wants to send here?
I believe the Supreme Procuratorate has did some intensive investigation into this case, and apparently it is their belief that in the first instance the court didn't find sufficient evidence to support its verdict, and also procedurally I think the police didn't do a very good job, and also the defendant did have a good legitimate justification to appeal for a self-defense, a justifiable self-defense. So taking that into account, I guess the top prosecutor in the state has intervened and did the right thing to correct the mistakes made in the first instance.
Professor Jiang, now what is the importance? The importance here is to understand that the top prosecutor's office has offered its opinion and has changed the official verdict of the first trial from intentional injury into a suggested second verdict, let's say, of unjustifiable excessive self-defense. What is the criteria here?
The difference between the verdict of the first instance trial and the opinions of the Supreme People's Procuratorate is that in the verdict of the first instance trial, the court was reluctant to recognize that there is a self-defense. But the Supreme People's Procuratorate says in this statement that there is a self-defense, but it's an excessive self-defense. So in this sense that the Supreme People's Procuratorate is different from the verdict of the first instance trial. But if the Shandong Higher People's Court agrees with the opinion of the Supreme People's Procuratorate, it means that Yu Huan is still very possible to be sentenced to imprisonment.
Do we know, according to the Chinese law, what could possibly be his sentence, Professor Jiang?
I guess that the sentence will be from 3 years to 10 years, which is much lighter than the former life imprisonment.
Yeah, Mr. Bai, how much do you think the public opinion or the heated online debate that has aroused after the first verdict shaped the opinion of the top prosecutor's office in your eyes?
Well, from what the top, the State Supreme Court has said in its news release, I guess the state, prosecutors, the highest authority of the prosecutor, definitely has taken note of the public opinions on this case, which over the past few months has ignited quite some heated debate in the internet, etc. And I guess the public opinion definitely has had an impact on this, because it's so obvious that the first verdict by the first instance court appeared to be, a certain form of miscarriage of justice from the top prosecutor's point of view. And the public opinion certainly will continue to have an impact, I guess, in the second instance as well.
So how do you judge the influence, the sway public opinion has had on this case? Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it has been positive so far?
Well, this is a very interesting topic, particularly in the context of China. I would say in a much more sophisticated legal system, the public opinion should not have such a huge impact on the judicial process. And the judiciary is supposed to be insulated from the public opinion, because they're supposed to be independently to carry out their functions and to execute their adjudication power. But here in China, I guess we have to live with many things that are unique to China only. For example, stability and the opinion of the public has to be taken into account into the judicial process, because apparently here in China, stability is one of the ultimate objectives of the judiciary as well, apart from rule of law itself. So when it comes to stability, I guess the public opinion has to be taken seriously. And although in the long run, this can be, problematic as well. So we have to be very careful going forward down the road.
So there is a potential risk that the general public, that the public opinion could have too much influence on the judicial judgments. Professor Jiang, what is your take on this case so far, and on the relationship between the press, the public opinion, and the judicial work by, in a relatively independent fashion?
I agree with Mr. Bai that ideal world that the judiciary should be independent from any illegitimate influence, but in this case, I think the public and the press has played a very positive role to help the judiciary to make further investigations into the facts. Actually, I think at present in China, at least the public and the press can play more positive role in shaping judicial fairness. I mean that the general public and the press can help the judiciary to have better verdict or better judgments.
So you think there is a positive role, at least so far, than the kind of influence by the general public to influence China's judicial work. Another very interesting thing is the huge amount of transparency that has been attached to this case by the relevant authorities on the social media platforms. As we know, the Provincial Higher People's Court posted a lot of Weibo messages. Mr. Bai, how do you look at this kind of real-time dissemination of information concerning court trials in China? Is that something unprecedented in your eyes?
Well, yeah, to a certain extent, this is quite unprecedented. Of course, simply because this is a very high-profile case, and it has drawn a lot of attention from the media and from the general public. There's a lot of debate, a lot of discussion on the internet, etc. I think this is a positive development. I guess transparency is always an integral part of the rule of law process. I mean, rule of law is the ultimate goal of the country, and for every civilized society, I mean, does involve a transparency. So this has to be maintained and it has to be ensured in every possible way, because it's only through transparency that will hold the judiciary, the legal practitioners, and the state government authorities and various government agencies accountable. So this is going to be very important. I think in the future this will set a precedent that transparency will continue to be maintained and to be stick to.
Very quickly, one word from each of you. Professor Jiang, you first, then Mr. Bai. What is the biggest lesson to be drawn from this case?
I think the biggest lesson which can be drawn from this case is that we should try to balance the right of the defender and the right of the attacker in a self-defense case.
Mr. Bai?
I think the legal counsel's role will be continually to be more emphasized, and will be given more room to play instead of having the highest authority to intervene in order to redress the miscarriage of justice at the lower level courts in the future.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Bai Xianyue, Managing Partner of Chengyi Law School, and Professor Jiang Su from Peking University. And here is my last point. What has impressed me most about this case is the unprecedented level of access to the public given to it by the Shandong Provincial High People's Court. Now on Saturday 27th from 8:30 in the morning till 11 in the evening, that's some 15 hours, the court sent a total of some 130 live tweets of statements, pictures and short videos of what was happening in the courtroom for anyone interested to watch. There was also heated debate in the comments where netizens freely expressed their opinions, including voices of support and opposition. Whether or not the final verdict will be accepted by the general public is not for me to comment on, but the fact that people could see such an important deliberation unfold in real time in front of their eyes is an important step of building trust in the country's judicial system. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Point. As always, follow me on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. I'm Lu Xin, and you got the point.